I want to tell you about a new podcast called Amuse News. Publishing multiple days a week, Amuse News is your source for food news, interviews from around the food world, and more. On the show, we'll be engaging with food storytellers, from chefs to advocates to people working in the field, and many more. Find Amuse News wherever you get your podcasts. Amuse News is a destination for everyone who's looking for a new, insightful look into the world of food.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network. HRN is food radio supported by you. Learn more at heritageradionetwork.org.
This episode is brought to you by Wisconsin Cheese. We've been making cheese in Wisconsin since before we were even a state, which may be one reason why we win so many awards for it. It's what happens when a whole state dreams in cheese. Find your next favorite cheese at wisconsincheese.com.
This is Capri Cafaro, host of Eat Your Heartland Out. On the next episode, I'm joined by two guests who are journalists by trade and forged a path as stewards of Midwestern storytelling. Meet James Norton, the editor and co-founder of Heavy Table based in the Twin Cities, and Amanda Godosic, the founder of the Midwest Nice blog. Amanda, thanks so much for joining the program.
Thank you for having me.
We have so much to talk about. I know from our previous conversations, I am just so energized by your path, by everything that you've done, by your passion for the Midwest, and so excited to share your story with our listeners. So let's kind of just go back to the beginning, which is usually where I start with so many of my guests. But I think your origin story is actually quite cool and really important. You are a Midwest native, so you've had this love for the Midwest, dating back to childhood. Set the stage for us as far as, how you grew up in Wisconsin and how that experience kind of planted the seed for your journey later in life.
Yes. So I am from Wisconsin, born and raised, and very, very proud of that. And I grew up very much raised by a village. I was very lucky and fortunate to spend a lot of my childhood at my grandmother's house, my dad's mom, and she was the best cook I've ever known. I learned most of what I know from her. And so basically every other weekend we were at her house, and it was Friday through Sunday, breakfast, lunch, and dinner was all homemade from scratch, from things she had grown in the garden or canned or, made herself. And it would be my grandma and my dad and my aunts and uncles and cousins. And it would just be everybody around her table eating. And most pictures of me from my childhood, I either am at a kitchen table on the kitchen counter or holding a utensil in my hand of some kind. Because I just was always in the kitchen helping or eating something that she had made. My nickname when I was little was actually garbage disposal, because if somebody didn't finish it, I would. And I was also really, really lucky to have a local youth center in my town that when I got a little bit older, I started going down and spending my weekends there. And the couple that runs it, Sean and Dawn Pearson, were so kind and so encouraging. And they saw this kind of budding interest I had in food, because I came of age the same time the Food Network came of age. And so Rachel Ray came on the screen and I was like, oh, you can do this? Giada De Laurentiis is making food in a gorgeous kitchen, and Ina Garten is living the dream. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is an option. And so I just got even more passionate about food and communicating that passion about food. And with the skills that I had from my grandma and with learning that food media was an option, I decided to pursue a journalism degree, because from the time I was 15, I started saying, well, if I can make food for my friends and family and get paid to write about it, that's the dream job. That's all we want to do, right?
I mean, that's certainly a dream job for me, and I think probably for many of our listeners. And what you're describing about, growing up in the Midwest and, being around the table with your grandma and spending all of this time cooking with family and eating with family. I think that's something that is so relatable and really such a defining moment for many of us. Whether you grew up in the Midwest or not, that kind of culinary experience growing up often shapes, all of us culturally and otherwise. Did you grow up eating any specific like ethnic foods because of your background?
Yes. So I am, much like most people in Wisconsin, of Polish and German descent. My grandma was 50-50. My dad was 75-25. So I'm a little bit of a mix in there as well. And so we would have pierogi or borscht. My grandma made the best beet jelly. Like, to this day, I have her recipe in my recipe box. And like, people hear the phrase beet jelly and are like,
I was just going to say, I don't know how much people are like, oh, beet jelly. You know what? Like, I'm going to put that in my repertoire.
It really works. Yeah. So there were the traditional dishes. And, at Christmas time, we always had the opłatki, the Polish opłatki, Fat Tuesday.
What is that for folks that are not familiar?
Opłatki is that little wafer. This was more traditional than a recipe per se, but it was the little wafer that you'd break off and dip in honey. And it was about giving thanks and asking for blessings. And it was just a really beautiful tradition that we all did around the dinner table during the holidays. And then, Fat Tuesday, having the punchki, the Polish donuts.
Punchkis, yes.
Yes. Or, also Shrove Tuesday, doing the pancakes and things like that. And, of course, fish fry. I mean, I started serving at my first fish fry when I was in first grade. So we know
that the fish fry is, it is obviously there is a religious component, and many, many churches do fish fries as well as many other like ethnic clubs and a whole host of people. But it is a religion in the Midwest, and, you have to like map out where the best fish fries are. So I feel you on this.
Yes. Yes. So I grew up in a very small town, and it was like the KC Hall, you went and you had your fish fry, and they had students from the parochial school were the servers. And this is something that at the time you didn't think anything of it. And looking back now, you have to laugh, but it was like, there were 7-year-olds going to the bar, grabbing brandy old fashions and taking them to the table and being like, okay, who had the brandy old fashioned sweet? Who had the brandy old fashioned sour? And it was just very much
it's totally normal. What are you talking about?
Yes, absolutely. Nobody batted an eye. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if it still happened at that KC Hall today. So yeah, definitely had those traditional foods. My dad was always making brats. I still make my brats just the way my dad did, boiled in beer with onions. And they're, always a quintessential Wisconsin brand. And it's just, food has really been the constant in my life, no matter what else has changed or been added or removed. Food has always, and I like to think will always be there.
And it is a constant in our lives. I mean, it is a constant in our lives. It is a constant in, particularly again, when you grow up like this, it's a touchstone, I think, for so many of us. And I relate, so much to your story growing up with your grandmother and, cooking with your grandmother and having those ethnic foods. I mean, in my case, being Italian, also Ukrainian, so pierogies certainly were involved too for me. Mm-hmm. But having that constant. And knowing a little bit about your story, it really is this thread that continues throughout your life. So, I know that you had this kind of, I don't want to say epiphany, but this kind of aha moment with the Food Network of, wait a minute, I could, combine my passion for food with, communicating, with writing, with, sharing stories. So you went to journalism schools kind of as a result, right?
Yes, I did. I had the grand idea because I grew up also in the age of every heroine in a rom-com I watched worked at a fancy magazine in New York. So my plan was, I'm going to go to journalism school. I went to a Midwestern school. I went to Northwestern University and got my journalism degree in magazine
it's a
writing.
great journalism school.
Yes, it really was. And I often like to joke that I was the Elle Woods of Northwestern. Like, I probably shouldn't have been there, but I had the heart and the spirit. And I wrote every piece, every assignment I wrote about food. If it was a weather story, it's how does seasonal depression affect appetites? If it was supposed to be a sports story, it was about, how do athletes fuel their bodies? And I just was constantly writing about food in school. And then when I wasn't in school, or sometimes when I was supposed to be in school in class, I was eating around Chicago, and that broadened my food horizons even more. Mm-hmm. But I had these grand plans of, graduating and moving to New York and writing for the Food Network magazine. And ultimately that didn't happen, but I'm so grateful that it didn't, because I'm doing really and truly what I feel I'm meant to be doing, which is food blogging. So I have my website. I create recipes for readers who are really looking for, the joke is always, oh, the Midwest, it's meat and potatoes, right? And I do a lot of that.
Right.
And I have a husband who hunts. I do a lot of wild game, a lot of carbohydrates, but then also, especially this year, my plan is to lean even more heavily into that Midwestern culture. So I have been working on my fish fry recipe for months, making sure that it's perfect, and not just the fish, but all those components of the fish fry, from the coleslaw to the fries, to that buttered piece of rye bread that is like so perfectly soft.
Oh my gosh. How could you forget about that?
Exactly. So I really I love the idea that somebody could be making their own Midwestern memories with my recipes.
I love that too. Now, this is obviously not your first blog foray, so I want to rewind to your freshman year in college when you had the bright idea of having a food blog, which was, I guess, your first foray into food blogging.
Yes, it was. I discovered, again, I was in college and I was a broke college student, and, I'd be studying in Starbucks and be thinking, man, I could really go for one of those mini vanilla bean scones. And I was like, but I can't afford that. I wonder if I could make it myself, because I lived in a dorm that had a kitchen on every floor. And I picked my dorm solely for the fact that it had a kitchen on every floor, because I knew that no matter where I was assigned, I would have access to a kitchen. So when I moved in, under my dorm bed, I had 2 mixing bowls, a handheld mixer, and a wooden spoon. And I was like, all right, we're going to figure this out.
Amazing. I mean, that's really a lot of forethought for, a graduating senior that is really thinking, hey, probably not at the top of a lot of college kids' lists is I want a kitchen in my dorm.
And I needed that. I knew that it would be a way not only for me to de-stress and decompress, but also that's how I make friends. That's how I care for people. That's how I connect with people. So it not only was great to make a cake for somebody's birthday or make chocolate chip cookies for a special occasion, but if people could hear and smell what I was making in the kitchen, it's like that cartoon where the wolf smells the pie on the windowsill. People would come into the kitchen from smelling the apple pie.
You're like, hey, I want to be your friend.
Yes. So it's how I made friends. And I really think it's how I became the social chair of the dorm.
That's a good way to do it.
Yes, absolutely. And so I discovered what food blogs were by necessity. I wanted to make a recipe because I couldn't afford to buy it. And then I discovered what food blogs were, and I just dove into them so deep headfirst. And yes, I created my first blog called The Domestic Goddess, which I was so pleased with myself.
That is brilliant. You should be.
Yes. And I had a little digital camera, and I had scrapbook pages that I used as backgrounds. And to this day, I remember I made a white chocolate pretzel cupcake, because that back then it was such an exercise in creativity. It wasn't an assignment. It was just a purely passion project.
Yeah, but and it comes through.
Well, thank you.
But what a fantastic way to learn, though. I mean, you're following your passion, your senses, you're kind of doing it very organically. All of those experiences end up informing, uh, later professional experiences as well.
Yes, absolutely. I really, this is something that now that I'm in my 30s, I can look at this behavior with a little bit more honesty and a little bit more compassion, in that I wasn't immediately
Sure.
successful at this blog that I started my freshman year of college, because I was reading all of these big blogs at the time, How Sweet Eats and Pioneer Woman, and these people that were really at the forefront. They really, were pioneers in the food blogging space. And I wasn't, an overnight success. So I gave up pretty quickly. And sometimes I think, where would I be if I hadn't done that, if I just would have stuck with it? But ultimately, I know that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And that is in my little Wisconsin kitchen, making food.
And it seems like that was absolutely the place for you to be. But you had a few more stops on the road before you got back to Wisconsin in that kitchen. Actually, let me back up one more time and talk. Have we talked about your independent study yet? I don't want to leave
No.
Midwestern Northwestern University yet, because I think that this is also a really cool story about doing an independent study on food blogging.
Yes. So freshman year, I discovered what food blogging was. And by my senior year, I very luckily was able to take an independent study with a professor, Professor Owen Youngman. I'm not sure if he's still at Northwestern. I should look him up. But I had taken a class of his on Google, and I had the idea of okay, how does a food blog interact with Google? Like, what are the Google best practices that a food blog needs to know in 2014, which now, a decade later, they're totally different. It's the landscape has changed so much. But it was really fun and really exciting to do. It was also great that I got to blog for credit and kind of track my stats and experiences. And again, it was a learning, and that was a little bit, that was the start of me kind of breaking my stubborn shell that I have. And I think a lot of creatives experience this, where if they're not immediately good at something, they quit and move on to something else.
Yeah, it's tough. Times is tough being a type A. It's
yes.
If you don't get something done, if you're not perfect at it right out of the gate, even though you've never done it before, it's time to hang your head in shame.
Yes. If I don't have the innate ability to just do this flawlessly at first execution, then what am I even living for? And luckily, I am definitely working past that now. And blogging has been the greatest exercise in doing that, because things are always changing. The landscape is always shifting.
Sure.
And it's about being open and willing to learn and to adjust. And honestly, I think that is a perfect correlation with being in the kitchen too, right? You constantly have to adjust and
trial and error.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
And you can't be afraid to fail. I mean, it is partially it is trial and error. And sometimes you're chasing, a taste memory that, you really have to tweak in order to get it right for it to be how you remembered it. Sometimes, you can follow a recipe and it just does not come out, the way that you wanted to for whatever reason. So, you do kind of have to put that type A ego aside in the kitchen. And I find that correlation really interesting. It sounds like that is some good advice for aspiring bloggers as well.
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing that helped me in my journey, particularly in the last 4 or 5 years, is just being willing to say, I don't know. I don't actually know how to do X, Y, and Z. And either figuring it out yourself or going to the expert. It's the same with watching the Food Network, right? I wasn't a professional chef, but I was watching these people who were and learning techniques of how to properly brown mushrooms or how to properly sear a steak, and all of these different techniques that I just wasn't innately born with.
Well, and what else though, the magic of any kind of media, which, I'm sure you are aware of now, is, it takes 2 or 3 days to film, a 26, minutes show. And so, there's all kinds of magic in the camera of plating and, the food styling and how many times you do take. I mean, there's so much that goes into those things that look flawless, but really are not,
Yes.
because people are not doing it in one take.
No. No, and it's,
So,
again, that's...
I'm just saying, be easy on yourself.
Yes, I'm learning. I think as time goes on, I'm learning that more and more too. I actually, 2 weeks ago, was remaking our wedding cake. I baked our wedding cake 5 years ago, and every year I remake it.
Oh,
and
wow.
I messed it up.
I love that.
Thank you. It's a very fun tradition, but I messed it up 3 times before I got it. And it's a recipe that I have written down, and I've literally made it for 5 years. And for whatever reason, this day, it just, I could feel when it was off the first time, and the second time I had high hopes, and I was like, okay, well, I did change that one thing. I guess I shouldn't have. And the third time, nailed it. It was perfection.
But, I mean, the third time's a charm, right?
Exactly.
Third time is a charm. So let's go back to your journey. I know that you ended up moving to a different part of the country that has a lot of food pride. And maybe that also kind of inspired you to reconnect with your pride for the Midwest.
Oh, it did. It absolutely did. So speaking of the third time being the charm, I moved to South Carolina after I graduated from Northwestern. And I was working in restaurants, and I was incredibly homesick because there's something about not only moving away from your home, but moving away from the region. It was like you said, I moved to the South, which is very, very known for its food and its food culture and the contributions that it has made to the map of like the culinary tapestry of the United States. And I realized how much I missed my food traditions, my family recipes, my fish fries. I realized how much I missed all of that. And just being so homesick, I made my third food blog, which is what I do now full time, which is Midwest Nice Blog. And I just wanted it to be a celebration of the Midwest and how much we have to offer here. And I'm also really happy that during my time in South Carolina, I learned so much more about food and food techniques. And I was the head of a pastry program. I worked at multiple bakeries and ate my way around the South. And it was just an invaluable learning experience, just like going to college in Chicago was an invaluable learning experience.
Mm-hmm. Sure. You get exposure to so many different flavors.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And it just deepened my appreciation for being from the Midwest and from Wisconsin, to bring cheese curds into work. I'd travel home.
Right.
And then the next week at work, when I came back, I had some new Glarus that I had driven down and some cheese curds that I'd packed in a cooler.
For people that don't know about New Glarus, it is one of the best beers in America, but you cannot get it outside of Wisconsin.
No, you cannot. It's illegal to sell it anywhere outside of Wisconsin. So I would, bring 6-packs back for me and my coworkers, and we would literally eat fresh Wisconsin cheese and drink some of the best Wisconsin beer. And it was just so fun. It was so fun to share that with my Southern friends.
And what did they think? How did they react to those different flavors that maybe they had not had before?
Oh, everybody loved it, of course. I mean, the concept of squeaky cheese just blew their minds. No, but it was always so fun to share those things and to really kind of you trade these things back and forth, right? Like, I learned how to make the best biscuits that I've ever had living in the South. And I like to think that, oh yeah, I taught people how to make beer brats or how to have cheese and sausage, right? Like summer sausage and cheese, and we're watching a football game, and it was so much fun.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, it sounds like a regional foodways exchange program, which nothing wrong with that. Getting a chance to share your different cultures with one another, while, getting together and doing so, through food is just one of the best things, I think. So somehow you ended up back from South Carolina to Wisconsin, but you started the Midwest Nice blog, while you were still in South Carolina. So you decided you were going to move back and continue it, right?
Yes, I did. Yep. My older sister had babies, and I met these babies and I held them. And it just, in that moment, everything crystallized, and it was, I need to move home. I realized that while I had these beautiful experiences in the South, and I made dear friends who are lifelong friends still to this day, that it just wasn't the place for me for one reason or another. Like I am Wisconsin through and through. I am so proud to be from here. I love this state and what it provides so much. And so, yeah, I moved home and I got a job that, a high school employer had opened a craft brewery in the town next to where I grew up. And he was kind enough to offer me a job, even though he'd known me as a flighty little high schooler. And he's like, yeah, I'll give you a chance. And so I got to work behind the bar of an amazing brewery and learn even more about beer and how beer culture itself is such a part of the Wisconsin DNA, and take a lot of pride in that too. And I met my husband while serving him a beer at that bar. And it was
Look at that.
Yes. It was one of those things where I think also very much like when you're in the kitchen, once I stopped fighting it, once I allowed things to flow, once I stopped forcing, I forced myself to stay in South Carolina to get jobs, I was just trying to forcibly make roots. Once I stopped fighting that and I came back to Wisconsin, everything fell into place so quickly, so easily. I won't say effortlessly because it's taken a ton of effort to get to where I am today, but it's effort that I enjoy so much, endlessly, boundlessly. It's energizing instead of exhausting. And yeah, now I get to, like I said earlier, I make food in our little kitchen with our little dog every day, and I get to share it with the world. And it's really fun to share a personal history and sort of the regional and geographical history too. I mean, we talked about beer brats and cheese curds, but let's talk Jell-O salads. Let's talk
Jell-O salads. I mean, absolutely.
Yeah. My husband's family it's called Aunt Frida's salad, and it is a green Jell-O based salad that happens to have cheddar cheese in it. And, it's a staple at family get-togethers. Or, cranberries. I think it's something like 60-70% of the world's cranberries come from Wisconsin. And it's just so fun to me. People think of Wisconsin, they think, oh, beer, cheese, and Packers. And it's like, yeah, but ocean spray, or, so I really am diving even more into cranberry recipes and really sharing those, because there's so much you can do with a cranberry. It's been really fun.
Absolutely. I mean, it sounds like fun, and that fun and that energy comes through with everything that you're saying about, basically ending up exactly where you need it to be. So it's really, it's been about the journey, but ultimately the destination is exactly where you were supposed to be from day one, there in your grandma's kitchen, all the way, fast forward 30 plus years later to your own kitchen with your husband and your dog and your, Jell-O salad and your brats and your, figuring out how to make wild game. What's on the horizon for Midwest Nice, coming up?
Yes. Thank you for asking. I am just going to continue. I really am focusing this year on just really digging deep into that Wisconsin Midwestern roots and sharing those recipes. I'm looking at my calendar here, and I have 4 different Jell-O salad recipes that I'm going to be sharing in the coming months. Finally sharing my fish fry recipe, doing more wild game. My husband is a big hunter. And in the summer, I've just started the planning stages with a friend, a local friend. He owns a restaurant and a hotel in a beautiful part of Wisconsin. And we're actually planning our first Wisconsin foodie retreat. So my fellow food bloggers from all across the country, yes, some fellow food bloggers are going to travel here, and we are going to spend a weekend enjoying all of the joy and the delicious food that Wisconsin has to offer. So on the docket, we're going to do a fish fry. My husband is from a big farming family, so we're planning to have it so that they're here during peak sweet corn season, so we can go and pick fresh sweet corn and show people how we make freezer corn, how we make corn chowder, recreate those Wisconsin State Fair cream puffs, have a great Bloody Mary bar, just do all of those really fun things and showcase just how many wonderful things there are in Wisconsin to enjoy.
Well, I mean, sign me up. That sounds like an absolute blast.
You are more than welcome
and
to
a
come.
masterclass. And it sounds like a masterclass in, Wisconsin culinary food ways for folks that, might not be able to make it to that, or, want to know more about Jell-O salads and all of this really fun, authentic Midwest food. How can they find you in your blog?
Yes, absolutely. I would love if everybody went to my website. It is called MidwestNiceBlog.com. And I'm on all social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, at Midwest Nice Makes. So you can find me there, and I share recipe videos. I share snippets of our life in the Midwest. My husband went viral a couple of years ago for sharing his green Jell-O salad recipe. So it's always a fun time over there.
Well, I mean, what better way to go viral than for green Jell-O salad? I mean, if that is definitely an aspiration for anyone inside or outside of the Midwest. I'm going to have to check that out. This has been an absolute pleasure and a blast. Thank you so much for sharing your story, your journey with us, Amanda. And we'll certainly be sure to check out the Midwest Nice blog.
Thank you so much for having me, Capri. This is just a dream come true.
This is Eat Your Heartland Out with me, Capri Cafaro. After the break, I'll welcome James Norton, author and co-founder of the magazine Heavy Table.
This episode is brought to you by Wisconsin Cheese. There's a reason when you think of Wisconsin, you think cheese. Cheese is a huge part of Wisconsin's history and future. In Wisconsin, the state of cheese, the tradition of cheese-making excellence began 180 years ago, before Wisconsin was recognized as a state. Immigrants traveled to settle in this lush green hills of Wisconsin, bringing their cheese-making traditions with them. These storied skills, combined with the freshest milk available, created a cheese-making culture that is uniquely Wisconsin. Wisconsin's 1,200 cheesemakers, many of whom are third and fourth generation, continue to pass on old world traditions while adopting modern innovations in cheese-making craftsmanship. Find your next favorite cheese at wisconsincheese.com.
We want to welcome you, James. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Tell our listeners a bit about, where you started and ultimately how that got you where we are today.
Yeah, I jumped into journalism back around the turn of the millennium, doing hard news, actually I was a Middle East news editor for the Christian Science Monitor in Boston.
It does not get more hardcore than that, let's be honest, particularly at that time in life. Christian Science Monitor, Boston, and the Middle East.
It was an exciting period in that region, although that region tends to stay lively. And so that's kind of how I got rolling in the journalism business. And 4 or 5 years after that, I actually made a jump into radio, and I was working with Al Franken, who later became a senator for the state of Minnesota, as he started his radio show in New York City. So I kind of went from straight news journalism into partisan talk radio. Mm-hmm. And then
the radio show moved to Minneapolis, St. Paul, which brought me into the beautiful upper Midwest part of the country. And I started doing basically some freelancing in the world of food and drink. And as my interest in politics kind of diminished, my interest in the way people eat and drink and talk about all things culinary really began to spike. And I kind of transitioned my career from hard news into all things edible.
Well, you make me feel less strange, having gone from a life in public service and government and public policy to a world of culture and culinary and all of those things that you just discussed. Are you a Midwest native?
I am. I grew up and went to college in Madison, Wisconsin. So
That's what I thought.
My home city.
So you have those Midwestern roots already, and you came back thanks to Al Franken, and you got inspired somewhere along the line and shifted your focus. What if anything really was there a specific precipitating moment where you're like, you know what? This is why I really love the subject of food and drink and culture. Was there that one little spark that kind of got you going in a different direction?
I think the really key turning point was starting work on the book, The Master Cheesemakers of Wisconsin. Obviously I grew up in Wisconsin. I knew that we had great cheese. I enjoyed a slice of cheese from time to time. But it was kind of the process of digging into just how deep these traditions were, just how skillful these makers were, how varied and like widely spread the different traditions were, that made me think, oh, this has been here under our noses in plain sight the whole time, but we just don't really recognize that the cheese of Wisconsin is such a incredible, internationally recognized, fantastic thing. I think we tend to overlook it and think, oh, well, Vermont is fancier, or California is bigger, or France is the world's best. And actually getting on the road and going to these cheese plants, talking to these makers, made me think, oh my goodness, there's this incredibly deep, serious food tradition here in the upper Midwest that I didn't really see. And that kicked off a number, and we could talk more about this as we go, a number of different explorations into things in Wisconsin, in Minnesota, beyond, where there's just excellent work being done, often underappreciated, but as delicious as anything you can eat anywhere on the planet.
Absolutely. And I do want to circle back to that. And I do want to dig deeper into your book about Wisconsin master cheesemakers. But I want to go back into this, concept of how did you want to write a book about cheese? I mean, there had to be something around you that said, I want to explore this as opposed to, what I'm doing now. And I recognize that there's sort of two separate things probably going on. One is a, diminishing interest in what you were doing as far as politics, but an increasing interest in this, sort of food and drink and culture world. But, what brought you to the cheese book?
Well, the inciting incident was my wife and I were taking a cross-country road trip, and we ended up in San Francisco at the Ferry Building. And we were at a cheesemonger there, and it turned out the cheesemonger was from Minnesota. And so we were talking about Midwestern cheese, and she just started chatting with us about the Wisconsin Master Cheesemaker program and how they take these journeymen or master cheesemakers who already know their stuff, bring them back to an academic environment, train them up even further, and give them this sort of master's mark. And my wife, Becca, and I, we were so interested in this and so curious about it and so excited about it. And we were driving north up to Portland, Oregon after that. And we were in the car. And I don't remember if it was her or I. One of us said, well, wouldn't it be interesting, to meet the people who are so fanatic about cheese that they become professional cheesemakers and then go back and get the certification. And, Becca's a photographer. I'm a writer.
Yeah. How long did it take you to assemble and do the research?
I think it was about 7 or 8 months. And We did about 7,200 miles of driving on Wisconsin roads. We talked to 42 cheesemakers at 35 different dairy plants.
Wow.
And we got to basically every part of the state in the course of doing the book.
So what did you learn on this cheese road trip of yours that turned into a book?
Well, we learned a lot, but one of the things that really struck me is just I didn't fully appreciate that Wisconsin has third, fourth, even fifth generation cheesemakers, often with ancestry going right back to Germany
Switzerland.
or Switzerland or Italy. And so it's not just people came to Wisconsin, thought cows would be good here. I wonder if we can try to make cheese. It's people who in their bones knew what they were doing and had traditions that they were tapping into. Another thing that we learned is that there's also tremendous innovation. You get to the third and fourth and fifth generation and people start playing with mixed milks and adjunct ingredients and new techniques. And so you've got cheese as traditional as it comes, like really classic cheddars and Limburgers and stuff like that. But you also have cheeses that were invented in Wisconsin, like Colby and Brick, and then these new, it's sheep's milk and cow's milk and goat's milk, or it's rubbed with fennel pollen, or it's got stinging nettles mixed into the Gouda, like things like that, like just really exciting, interesting things that you don't often find other places. So you've got deep tradition, you've got innovation, and you've got it all going on in one place. And so you get out there and start talking to people, and it's just exciting to discover that breadth. And it's also really interesting, particularly the smaller kind of craft cheesemakers, just how multi-talented these people are. They're jacks of all trades or Jills of all trades. They do their own plumbing. They do their own electrical work. They drive the truck. I mean, they do everything because if they don't do it, they don't have the margins to survive. So they're these incredible hustlers who know dozens of different skills at a deep level. And some of these guys are in their, we met them in their late 50s, early 60s, even late 60s, running around on milk trucks, grabbing cheese out of vats, hauling, wheels around. I'm like, I don't think I could do that. Like it just athletic and fireballs of energy and creativity.
And all fueled by that passion for cheese.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything that really surprised you when you met these cheesemakers? Whether it was, maybe a technique or just a flavor profile that you never anticipated?
One of the interesting tidbits that I picked up on is a cheese called Justalipa, which is a Finnish cheese that's made in Wisconsin. I hadn't heard of it before doing this book, but it's actually produced in fairly good quantities. And it's called a bread cheese. You can actually put it on a griddle or a grill and sear it, and it won't melt.
So kind of like a halloumi. So
like a halloumi, exactly. And in Finland, one of the things they do with it is you'll cut it in a little block and you'll drop it in your coffee, and it'll sit at the bottom of your coffee and get really soft and release some of that lactose into your coffee. And you
Fascinating.
Isn't that weird? And you'll eat the little super soft cheese at the end of your cup of coffee. Not so in Wisconsin. The cheese has gone savory. It's gone salty instead of sweet. And it's something that you will grill up before a football game and serve as an appetizer. So in a sense, it's a very traditional Finnish style cheese, but it's been reinterpreted and reinvented in Wisconsin. And I don't know, it's just a little quirky thing, but it was something I didn't know before. And it was really fun to learn and to taste.
I know you have at least one more book that you have written more recently, but before we kind of venture on into that, I want to talk to you about one of your major projects that you have been kind of working on and around for almost 2 decades. And that is Heavy Table. So explain what that is all about and how it got started.
So Heavy Table got its start about 2009 as an advertiser-supported blog. I ran it until about 2018 in that format, took a break and got a food editor job at a magazine called The Growler in St. Paul for about 2 years. The pandemic popped up, wrecked The Growler, and I restarted Heavy Table as a Patreon-backed newsletter, and that's its current format. Over the years, we've published probably about 3 million words about upper Midwestern food. We've had dozens of regular contributors who've been all over the region, but we're particularly heavy in the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro.
Sure.
And it's just been like a blank check to explore upper Midwestern food, tell the stories that really mean the most to me and our contributors and our readers, and kind of get beyond the surface of our region. That's been the neatest thing about it, is we can ask deep questions, do long interviews, and go to places other people don't bother going.
Well, I mean, that's definitely aspects that I think drew me to your work, is that willingness to, dig a little deeper and, really highlight some of the complexities and the gems of the Upper Midwest for folks that aren't necessarily as familiar as certainly you or maybe even me with the Minneapolis-St. Paul area and aspects of the Upper Midwest. Give a little taste, literally and figuratively, of what makes this region unique and diverse when it comes to what's offered on the table there.
I would describe it as kind of a Germanic, Scandinavian bedrock of home food, comfort food, folk food that kind of resonates in the region. But what's really exciting to me is that we've had these waves of immigration come, particularly to the Twin Cities, and really changed the way people eat and drink. St. Paul, University Avenue particularly, there's an incredible wealth of Southeast Asian food, Hmong, Vietnamese, Cambodian, Thai, Lao, like all this stuff, first generation people cooking for other first generation people, and just doing like an incredible job. Anthony Bourdain came here and said it was the best Vietnamese food he'd had outside of Vietnam. And I haven't been to Vietnam.
Something.
That's saying something. A guy knew what he was talking about. There's also an incredible East African diaspora. And so Eritrean, Ethiopian, Somali, those restaurants are all over the place, and they're available, and they're really good. And particularly in East Lake Street here in Minneapolis, there is a real Latin, Mexican, Central American population, and you can get incredible tacos here, in other, roast chicken and rice and beans, other traditional Mexican foods that I think if you're just coming in through the airport and you haven't been here before, you would never guess. But there's just terrific Latin food, and it gets overlooked, and it's really on the rise. I think that one of the things I've been doing with Heavy Table that I'm excited about is watching immigrant populations, Asian populations, Latin populations get to the second and third generations, and you get these restaurateurs who come out who have the connection to these authentic eating traditions and super rich, bright flavors. And they're also very savvy about how to market to a general audience.
Yes.
So you're starting to see this like really, I hate to use the word authentic, but like really deep, complex food reaching out to like a broader audience in a more accessible way. And so it's really changing the character of the restaurants around here in a great way.
Now, this brings me to something that I wanted you to absolutely tell our listeners about, and that is your Feb-skiving tradition, because you mentioned this to me before.
Yeah.
And it's something that you kind of revel in to bring people from all over the country to experience what you now know about the Midwest.
Yeah, we're on year, 14 or 15 of this. I could track it down. It's not super important. But not long after moving here, I realized that every February I get incredibly depressed because it's dark and it's cold and it's miserable, and the winter just seems like it will never die. Like you're just
you are not alone, and I know that people might be listening to this podcast at any time, but right now we are in a bit of a polar vortex as we record.
Yeah, so it feels like permanent winter, and there's no hope, there's no light, there's nothing going on. And so my wife and I thought, well, why don't we just throw a really big dinner party, call it Febgiving. It'll basically be Thanksgiving menu, but copy pasted into the middle of February. And so we did that, and it turns out if you plan a big party like that, you've got to do a lot of like work beforehand and cleaning the house and making the menu and doing the shopping and getting the recipes and inviting the people and all this, mishigas that kind of surrounds it. And suddenly you're busy for weeks before this thing, and you're not thinking about how depressed you are and how dark it is. You're excited to see friends and excited to see family, and like it's kind of fun. And so we did it, at our house with about 10 or 11 people. And we started having friends come in from out of state. And then we started having friends fly in from both coasts. And now we're up to, I don't know, 25 to 30 people plus a bunch of kids. We rent some geodesic domes out in the suburbs and like set up camp and have like a
That's awesome.
3 or 4 day party. And it's this way to reconnect with people that we absolutely love and don't see often enough, who come into Minnesota in February from all parts of the country.
That's commitment. That is commitment.
Yeah, well, it's
on all parts, because you got to get to Minnesota.
Yeah,
you're braving the elements, as a guest and all those things, and then you and your wife and your family as hosts have as you said, a lot of work to do. Now I know you don't do this anymore, but I wanted you to talk about it anyway, which is Chef Camp Minnesota.
Yeah, so for about 5 iterations, I think over the course of 3 or 4 years, me and my business partner, Dave Friedman, who has since moved out of state, which is sort of the end of this project, would rent an entire YMCA summer camp called Camp Miller, about an hour and a half north of Minneapolis. And we would book 4 or 5 really top flight chefs to be instructors and teach something that they know on open fires. So we have big grills and campfires and all kinds of like open fire kind of cooking opportunities. And we would sell tickets. We get 90 to like 120 people would come up for the whole weekend, and it would just be chef instruction. It would be foraging. We would have like a 6-course dinner on Saturday night. We'd have a chef-led brunch. A couple times we did canoe bars. We'd canoe out into the lake, and there'd be a canoe there with drinks for you. We'd burn Swedish torches, which are like logs burning vertically around a giant campfire. And it was so much fun. We had astronomy and fermentation and cooking a whole octopus on the grill and a pachamama berry grill. And it was really a tremendous thing. And it was really fun to kind of embrace where we are in terms of the chefs being all Minneapolis, St. Paul people, and then getting out to the North Woods and like getting out there with the fresh air and the clean water and the fires burning outside. It was just a glorious time.
It sounds like it. I mean, again, I want to continue to needle you to bring this back, but it sounds like just a great concept, one that I know takes a lot of work as well, but one I'm sure participants get a ton out of when it was going on. So Chef Camp Minnesota, put a pin in it because maybe it'll come back in a different iteration. I mean, you are such an explorer of everything, in this region and beyond. And I know that has produced another book. You've produced another book. You've written another book. And I'm certainly not going to let you go without talking about that one as well. And it's called Lake Superior Flavors. And I know it probably sounds exactly how it's described, but tell us a little bit more about that book and how you came to write it.
Yeah, so Lake Superior Flavors is another book in collaboration with my wife, Becca. So she did the photography, I did the interviews and writing. It's a kind of a field guide to the food and drink along the Circle Tour, taking you all the way around Lake Superior. So if you wanted to break that out into regions, it's kind of a story of food on Minnesota's north shore of Lake Superior, and then into Ontario, Canada, like Thunder Bay, all the way over to Sault Ste. Marie. And then down through UP, Michigan, and then the south shore of Lake Superior, which is Wisconsin's kind of north coast. That's kind of how it breaks down. And it was really cool. We did the Circle Tour about 2.5 times. We made some other little trips up to kind of do research. And we went to restaurants. We met chefs. We went fishing with a herring fisherman in Lake Superior. We met a beekeeper. We went foraging. Oh, wow. We went, met brewers and vintners and just kind of dug into the people making and celebrating food from the region of Lake Superior and tried to figure out what does that mean, what's it about, what are people eating and why. And it was a blast. It's a food book. It's also a travelogue, and it's really one of the most beautiful parts of the whole country. I think Lake Superior is very under celebrated for how legitimately majestic and awe-inspiring that it is.
I Couldn't agree more. There's no question about that. I mean, Lake Superior is beautiful. And I mean, just all the things that you just kind of touched upon at a very high level. So many different beekeepers to brewers. There's obviously a lot to see, a lot to offer going out, obviously on the lake and fishing. How did you identify the subjects that you ultimately featured? Did you stumble upon them, or was it research, a little bit of both?
It's always a little bit of both. When I work on a trip like this, I have an itinerary that I've developed partially through my own sort of online research, but partially by talking to people I trust in these various places and saying, hey, here's my project. Who should I talk to? And
Right.
usually people say, oh, you got to talk to this person, or, oh, she's doing something really cool. We'll line up interviews in every sort of city or between cities as available so that we have a schedule as we make our drive. But then, you just got to try eating at some random place, or like, oh, we were in UP, for example, driving through the middle of a forest and like, oh, there's a bakery here in the middle of the forest for no reason. Like, we got to go check it out. So great interview, great bread, like really
That's
weird.
amazing.
Yeah. So you just kind of like, you have to be open to what the universe is giving you on top of doing some pre-planning. It's definitely a mix. I think a good travel writer, has a plan and is not unwilling to abandon it if something more interesting comes along.
Or maybe total, disaster and chaos. Any good stories like that where, I don't know, the boat almost sank, or, you guys got snowed in someplace and couldn't get out?
We got caught in Canada during Canadian Thanksgiving, which we didn't plan for. And everything was
which
closed.
is in October, for folks that don't know. It's not November.
As we did not know. So that was, it wasn't a disaster, but it was inconvenient and surprising. The scariest thing that happened on the trip for me is we went out herring fishing with this guy, Steve Dahl. We didn't know anything about it. It was like, oh, he's going to take us out fishing. Cool. His boat was just like this flat little thing that's like 3 inches off the lake. The life jackets were like pounded flat, 40 years old.
Oh, boy.
And I don't like the water. I am not a water person. I am not a boat person. So it's like 5:30 in the morning. The sun is just coming up over the lake, and we're on this tiny little skiff, like heading out into the waves. I'm just like, oh my God, this is where it ends.
That would freak me out too, but it's a good story.
Yeah, it was. The photography was beautiful. The interview was good, and I survived, so it's fine. But it was more than I bargained for sure.
Yeah, but you know what? I mean, that is really what it's all about, is not being afraid to take those risks, because that's really sometimes where you find the most compelling stuff, and obviously timeless memories from something that you maybe wouldn't have done otherwise. If you weren't on this journey seeking out these stories from these individuals and these makers in these different ways. James, this has been such an exciting conversation for me, and to hear about all of your work has been inspiring, and hopefully inspiring to our listener as well. For folks that want to learn more, how do they find your books, and how do they find Heavy Table?
Yeah, I would just say go to heavytable.com or go to patreon.com/heavytable. And that's the best way to kind of connect with it. You can follow at a free level. If you back us for $5 a month, you get 4 newsletters, which are pretty substantial newsletters, one every Friday, telling you about food and drink in the upper Midwest. At the $10 level, it's actually 6 newsletters. So you can go heavy on it if you want. The books are available, I think mostly still available on Amazon. You can find them through my biography at Heavy Table. It's heavytable.com is probably your best starting point to catch up on what I've been doing.
Awesome. Well, folks, head to heavytable.com. We really appreciate your time and sharing with us your story, your journey, and your work. This has been so much fun. James Norton, thank you for taking your time to join Eat Your Heartland Out.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast.
You've been listening to Eat Your Heartland Out. This episode was produced by me, Capri Cafaro. Our audio engineers are Liam Warner and Armin Spengen. Theme music by Jason Shaw. You can learn more about the show by visiting heritageradionetwork.org/Eat Your Heartland Out. Eat Your Heartland Out is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.
Hey listeners, we're nearing the end of our 15th anniversary fundraising campaign, and we need your help to meet our goal. This campaign offers you a chance to win a unique food and music experience in one of the most exciting cities in America. Here's how it works. Donate to HRN and you'll be entered to win dinner for two and 2 tickets to a concert in one of 8 amazing cities: New York, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, Nashville, Las Vegas, Charleston, Ardmore, Pennsylvania, and Asheville. All donations support our work educating food system storytellers. And when you donate, you can choose one of those cities and you'll be entered to win dinner and 2 tickets to a show. So help us reach our goal and enter to win dinner and a show in the city of your choice. Check out heritageradionetwork.org/15 to donate and enter to win today. That's heritageradionetwork.org/15. Thank you.